Going back through editions in Shadowrun has been an interesting experience so far, especially as a player of the various games branded with Shadowrun. A lot of our assets got reused across the editions in various games, and it also made some of the design choices that happened in later editions not necessarily make sense, but I knew where they were coming from. Hindsight being 2020 and all that. Limits from 5th edition come to mind. In a game known for throwing buckets of dice at problems, it probably made sense to just put some kind of hard limit on how many dice you could get. It probably made sense to just put some kind of hard limit on how many hits you can get. Once you hit a certain amount, just stop counting. That's the most you can get. Though this kind of backfired in that it added more calculations and statistics that you needed to remember and keep track of during character creation. I'd say it was removed in 6 for this reason, but Shadowrun is also an IP that's changed a whole hell of a lot of hands, and the folks who once worked on it are probably since long gone. An equally plausible scenario to it was an idea that didn't work out so well would be, this is unnecessary rules bloat that makes no sense to us. Because, let's face it, even though tabletop RPGs are often described as an industry, it's one that doesn't really have any standards. And the only qualification you need to produce tabletop RPGs is having a vague idea that it somehow involves dice. Which is equally a blessing and a curse. Anybody can come in and do their thing, but we don't necessarily know how to judge whether somebody knows what they're doing and rely on a lot of hackneyed metrics that may not actually be helpful. But I digress. The 20th Anniversary Edition was a re-release of the 4th edition core book, making it likely that all the errata from 4th edition's initial release was applied. I speculate this since the index included a guide for what books included what information, be it in the core book or not. This was the touch that fascinated me the most, since this was a revision of an old game that pointed you of the direction to where to find other materials. And a practice that I think a lot of longer running games can benefit from, at least from a design standpoint. Because I always find it jarring to read through a new release or first printing of a book to find a sidebar mentioning upcoming books. Like, what if you wind up unable to deliver on that promise because of financial hardship, general apathy to the project, or some other circumstance? But on the other hand, I don't actually see this sort of advertising mid-book for other books that don't exist yet very often. It's mostly something I see in the bane of my existence. Big eyes, small mouth. Which is a bizarre case study all on its own regarding long-running tabletop role-playing game franchises. In my initial notes for this addendum, I made a point to bring up how currently we've got Big Eye Small Mouth 4th edition, but I was also seeing ads for a new edition of Big Eye Small Mouth 2nd edition, the Retro edition, which would make it the 3rd edition of the 2nd edition of Big Eye Small Mouth. Does the word edition even mean anything at this point? Because this is now reminding me of how people are getting around Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast's guidelines for publishing things for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition by simply saying that it's for 5th edition role-playing game or some other nudge nudge wink wink weasel wording. I frequently rant about this, I know, but intellectual property laws and algorithmic advertising has created a very strange sort of language that people speak regarding tabletop gaming media. Some words are forbidden, but you gotta get the point across some other way, so you use non-forbidden words that are often used alongside the forbidden words, and people will kind of know enough to put 2 and 2 together, and that's how you wind up with a "we got D&D at home," the D&D at home situation, which that is exactly what Pathfinder 1st edition was, but for some reason I can't rationalize it to myself that people do accept Pathfinder as a wholly different game from Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, which is technically true, but also not, because it was literally people taking OGL parts of D&D 3rd edition and making it their own game, only with slight modifications. Which, speaking of OGL and D&D 3rd edition, guess what we find at this intersection as well? If you guessed Big Eyes, Small Mouth, you would be correct, because that's how we got Big Eye Small Mouth D20. And in this year of our Lord 2024, you know what else exists? If you guessed a version of 5th edition role-playing tabletop RPG game that's anime themed with a very on-the-nose but at the same time wildly alien name like Anime 5e, well, guess what? You guessed right. Now, why would I document all this? Why would I go to great lengths to shout this all into a void that maybe like 1,000 people at most will pay attention to? Because history. Some antiquarian a few decades later might find these books that I'm naming off. Which books? Any of them. It doesn't really matter. But they might have questions. I don't know what questions they'll have specifically, but if they happen to be about why these books have so many similar revisions and additions, my testimony here could very well be a piece to that puzzle they've been looking for to make sense of it all. And this video will be the most interesting thing in the world to that antiquarian when they find it.